Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling something really foundational if you're thinking about starting a business.
Absolutely. The legal structure you choose. It's a big one.
Yeah, and we've gathered a lot of info on this, looking at everything from, going it alone to setting up more complex corporate frameworks.
And the key thing to get right away is that this isn't just paperwork.
Not at all. It's strategic. It hits your taxes, your personal liability, how easy it is to get funding, even just setting up.
Right. So our mission here is to go a bit deeper than just definitions.
Exactly. We want to really scrutinize the pros and cons, the advantages and disadvantages of the main legal options.
So you walk away with a really detailed understanding, maybe even feeling prepped for thinking about this critically, like for an exam situation.
Or just making smarter choices for your own venture.
Right. We'll focus on four main paths.
Okay.
The sole proprietorship, that's the one-person show.
Mm-hmm.
Then partnerships, including the limited versions.
Got it.
Then corporations like S-Corp and LLCs.
The more formal structures. And finally, franchising. A bit different, but important.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Where do we start?
Let's kick off with the simplest one. The sole proprietorship.
Makes sense. So, definition-wise, it's basically a business owned and run by one individual.
And crucially, there's no legal difference between the owner and the business itself.
That's the core point. And what strikes you immediately is how simple it is to set up.
Right. Usually you just need the right local and state licenses and you're good to go.
Which leads straight into the first big advantage, ease of formation.
Absolutely. Get your licenses, maybe register a business name, and boom, you're operating.
It's fast. You can jump into the market really quickly.
Yeah, think about like a freelance graphic designer. They spot a need, get a license, and they're offering services almost immediately. Great for agility.
But there's a flip side, right? A potential critique.
Definitely. While that speed is great initially, you have to ask, is this informality going to be a problem later?
When you're looking for serious money, perhaps?
Exactly. Investors doing due diligence might see that lack of formal structure and worry about, long-term planning or stability.
That's a really important link to future funding.
Yeah.
Okay, next advantage often mentioned.
Sole ownership of profits.
Simple enough. You earn it, you keep it.
All the profit goes straight to the owner. It's a huge motivator, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. That direct link between your hard work and your bank account. Very entrepreneurial.
Think of someone running a successful online shop from home. After costs, that money is theirs.
But critically, does that always encourage the best financial decisions for the business itself?
That's the potential downside. You might be tempted to pull all the profit out for personal use.
Instead of reinvesting for growth.
Precisely. It could hinder expansion compared to, say, a partnership where profit allocation might be a more strategic, shared decision.
Okay, good point. What about control?
That's another big plus.
Yeah.
Decision-making and control are all with that one owner.
Total autonomy.
Yeah. The owner calls all the shots. Need to change the menu in your small cafe. You just do it. No committee meetings.
Allows for quick pivots, responding fast to customer feedback or market shifts. A real strategic plus in some industries.
But the critique.
Well, it's all down to one person's perspective, isn't it?
Exactly. Blind spots. Personal biases. You might miss things a team would catch. Could limit innovation, maybe.
It definitely limits strategic thinking if you don't actively seek outside advice.
And that ties into the next advantage, flexibility.
Because you have that sole control, you can adapt easily. No board approvals needed.
Right. A small online retailer sees a trend, they can switch product lines almost overnight. Very responsive.
But again, critically, is that flexibility always strategic?
Or is it just reacting constantly? Does it maybe show a lack of a solid long-term plan? Constant change isn't always progress.
True. It needs direction.
Mm.
Okay, last advantage listed here.
Relative freedom from government control and no corporate income taxes.
Yeah, the regulatory burden is generally much lighter than for corporations. Less paperwork, fewer compliance hoops to jump through.
Saves time, saves money. A small service provider, like a tutor, has way less reporting to do. Big help when you're starting lean.
But this freedom comes at a price, doesn't it? A big one.
The biggest one, arguably. That lack of separation means your personal assets are completely exposed.
Which ties directly to that lack of corporate tax. You're taxed as an individual, but you also carry all the individual risk.
Right, and you might miss out on some tax strategies corporations can use. So it's simpler, but maybe not always the most financially efficient long-term or the safest.
Which brings us neatly to the disadvantages.
Yeah.
And number one, as you just said, unlimited liability.
Yeah. This is the scary one. The owner is the business legally. So business debts are personal debts.
It's stark. If the business gets sued or can't pay its bills,
Your personal stuff is on the line, your house, your savings, your car, everything.
it's a massive deterrent. It can make owners very risk averse, maybe too much so for real growth. Huge personal financial exposure.
Absolutely. Okay, next disadvantage.
Lack of continuity.
Meaning,
The business lives and dies with the owner. If the owner passes away, gets sick, or just retires.
the business often just stops existing, right?
Right.
Unless there's some specific plan, which is rare.
Exactly. Think of that beloved local shop that closes when the owner retires. There's no separate entity to carry on.
Which makes it hard to plan long-term, hard to sell, unattractive to investors.
A fragile model, really.
Yeah.
Limits funding, limits strategy.
Then there's the issue of capital.
Right. Less available capital, and it's tougher to get long-term financing
Why is that?
because you're relying mostly on personal funds and your own credit score. Banks often see sole proprietors as riskier bets.
So getting a big loan for expansion, much harder than for a corporation.
Definitely. It restricts your ability to scale up, take on bigger projects, directly impacts funding and growth strategy.
Makes sense. What else?
The relatively limited viewpoint and experience, we touched on this with control.
One person making all the calls.
Yeah. You lack that diversity of thought, different skills, different perspectives that you might get in a partnership or corporation.
So you might miss market trends, make strategic errors, just because you only see things one way.
Exactly. It can hinder innovation, problem solving, affects the whole business mindset.
And the final disadvantage listed.
Difficulty attracting and retaining high caliber employees.
Ah, right. Because you often can't offer the same salaries or benefits as bigger companies.
Precisely. Think competitive health insurance, retirement plans, stock options. Sole proprietors usually can't match that,
So top talent might go elsewhere.
which limits your human capital, hinders growth, innovation, again, impacts the potential and mindset of the venture.
Okay, that's a pretty thorough look at sole proprietorships. Lots to weigh up there.
Definitely. Simple start, but significant risks and limitations as you grow.
Right. So let's move on to partnerships then. How does that change things?
Well, the basic definition is an association of two or more people acting as co-owners of a business for profit.
Still relatively straightforward to set up compared to a corporation, often guided by something like the Uniform Partnership Act.
Yes, but the absolute crucial difference here, compared to going it alone, is the need for a really solid agreement.
The Articles of Partnership.
Exactly. This document is vital. It's the rule book for the relationship.
And our sources list a ton of things it should cover. It's not just about splitting profits, is it?
Not at all. It needs to be comprehensive. Things like, obviously, the business name, purpose, how long it's intended to last,
Okay, the basics.
but also who are the partners? General, limited. What's everyone contributing? Cash, skills, property, both now and maybe later.
Right, contributions and profit loss sharing.
Crucial. How is it split? What about draws or salaries? What happens if a partner leaves or passes away? Who has rights then?
Wow, okay, lots of contingencies.
Absolutely. How are business debts handled versus personal debts? Who has authority to make decisions or sign contracts?
That authority point seems key.
It is. Also, keeping books and records, how someone can sell their share, how disputes are settled, maybe arbitration.
Rules for changing the agreement itself.
Yes, modifications. Even things like required or prohibited acts. What happens if someone is sick or absent, managing employees.
It's a lot. So the takeaway is, don't skimp on this agreement. Get it drafted properly.
Absolutely essential to avoid conflict and provide stability down the line.
Okay, so assuming you have a good agreement, what are the advantages of partnering up? First one listed is ease of formation again.
Yeah, relative to incorporating, it's still generally less complex, less paperwork, less bureaucracy usually.
You draft the agreement, register the name, maybe fewer hoops than setting up a corporation.
Right. And the big plus here is you can pool resources quickly, combine skills, capital, get off the ground faster together.
So enhances that funding potential right from the start, like a tech expert partnering with a marketing guru.
Perfect example.
But
the critique.
it still requires immense trust, right? And that agreement really needs to be watertight. Formation might be easy, but maintaining a healthy partnership takes work.
True. Okay, next advantage. Direct rewards.
Similar to the sole proprietor, but shared. Partners benefit directly based on the profit sharing they agreed on.
Your share of the success comes straight to you. a strong motivator for everyone involved.
Encourages that shared entrepreneurial drive. If the business does well, everyone potentially earns more.
But the critical point
Disputes over fairness, right? If the profit split doesn't feel equitable over time, as contributions maybe change, that can cause major friction.
needs clarity and maybe even periodic review. Okay, what else?
Growth and performance facilitated by shared responsibility and expertise,
This is a big one. You're pooling skills, knowledge, capital. You get diverse perspectives built in.
which can lead to better strategies, right? More innovative thinking, better problem solving because you've got different heads working on it.
Definitely. Think of a design agency with partners specializing in different areas: web, print, branding. Stronger together. Improves strategy, mindset, even funding access.
But the effectiveness hinges on good communication, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Clear roles, open communication, and ways to resolve disagreements constructively are key. Otherwise, that shared expertise doesn't get leveraged properly.
Right. Makes sense. Flexibility is also listed as an advantage.
Yeah, generally easier to change the partnership agreement than a corporate charter.
So if the partners agree, they can adapt the business direction relatively easily, amend the agreement, and move forward.
Allows you to respond to market changes. But critically?
Everyone has to agree, right?
Exactly. Consensus is needed. If partners disagree strongly, decision-making can actually grind to a halt, hindering that very flexibility.
Okay. And the last advantage. Similar to sole props again.
Relative freedom from government control and regulation compared to corporations, and potential tax advantages.
Less red tape, and importantly, pass-through taxation.
Right. The partnership itself usually doesn't pay income tax. Profits and losses pass through to the individual partner's tax returns.
Avoids that double taxation issue we see with some corporations. Can save money, reduce admin overhead, good for funding.
And it's a huge the trade-off.
Unlimited liability, at least for general partners.
Exactly. Which leads us straight into the disadvantages of partnerships. And that's number one.
Unlimited liability for at least one partner, and a general partnership, usually all general partners.
Meaning their personal assets are at risk for the partnership's debts, just like a sole proprietor.
And the scary part is, one partner's mistake can bring everyone down.
Precisely. If one partner messes up, enters a bad contract, is negligent, all general partners can be held personally liable. Huge risk.
High personal financial exposure again. Okay, next disadvantage.
Lack of continuity. Similar issue to the sole proprietorship.
Because the partnership is tied to the specific partners.
Often, yes. If a partner leaves, dies, goes bankrupt, the partnership might legally dissolve according to the law or the agreement.
Causes disruption, makes long-term planning harder, might spook investors or lenders, affects strategy, funding.
Right. It could be an unstable structure if not planned for very carefully in the agreement.
Then, difficulty obtaining large sums of capital.
Again, compared to corporations, they're relying on the partner's personal wealth and borrowing power.
And big investors like VCs might be wary.
They often are. They might see partnerships as less scalable, potentially less stable, limits access to major funding for big growth spurts.
Okay, and this next one sounds tricky. Bound by the acts of just one partner.
Yeah, this is the principle of mutual agency in general partnerships.
Meaning one partner can legally commit the entire partnership to something?
Correct. Even if the others didn't know about it or agree beforehand, one partner signs a contract, the whole partnership is generally bound by it.
Wow, that requires an incredible amount of trust.
It really does. A single bad decision by one partner can have massive consequences for everyone. Significant risk factor.
And finally, difficulty disposing of partnership interest.
You can't just sell your share easily like stock, can you?
Generally, no. You usually need the other partners to agree to let you sell your stake or to buy you out.
Which can be tough if you want to retire or exit, and the others resist or can't afford it.
Makes the investment illiquid. Harder to get your money out compared to selling shares in a company. Impacts personal planning.
Exactly. So those are the core trade-offs for a general partnership.
But there are variations, right? You mentioned limited partnerships earlier.
Yes,
The LPs.
these limited partnerships. They offer a way around some issues, particularly liability for some partners.
How do they work?
You have at least one general partner who runs the business and has unlimited liability.
Okay, same risk there for them.
But you also have limited partners who primarily contribute capital. They don't manage the day-to-day.
And their liability.
Is typically limited to the amount they invested.
Yeah.
So their personal assets beyond their investment are protected. Governed by the Uniform Limited Partnerships Act, typically.
So it's a way to attract investors who want returns but not the management hassle or the full liability risk.
Precisely. Common in real estate, for example.
And then there's the LLP, limited liability partnership.
Right. This one is really popular among professionals, lawyers, accountants, architects,
Why them specifically?
because it offers the tax benefits of a partnership that pass through taxation,
Uh-huh.
while also shielding partners from liability for another partner's malpractice or negligence.
Oh, that's huge in those fields.
Fun.
So if your law partner messes up a case, you're not personally on the hook for their mistake.
Generally, yes. That's the key benefit. It protects you from vicarious liability for your colleagues' professional errors.
But you're still liable for your own mistakes, presumably.
Absolutely. You remain responsible for your own actions or negligence.
Okay, so LP and LLP offer ways to mitigate some of the standard partnership risks, especially liability.
They do, tailored for specific needs like investment or professional practice.
All right, this brings us to the big one, corporations.
Indeed. And the classic definition paints a clear picture. An artificial being, invisible, intangible, and existing only in contemplation of the law.
Meaning it's a totally separate legal entity, distinct from its owners, the shareholders?
That separation is the absolute cornerstone of the corporate structure.
And setting one up is more involved, right? More than just an agreement.
Definitely more complex.
Yeah.
You've got steps like getting initial investors to subscribe for capital stock,
Raising the initial money.
setting up a preliminary structure, electing a board of directors,
It's a governance piece.
and the critical step,
Mm-hmm.
getting that corporate charter, the certificate of incorporation, from the state. That's what officially creates the separate legal entity.
Okay, so more complex formation. But what are the payoffs? The advantages? Top of the list is usually
Limited liability.
the holy grail for many entrepreneurs and investors.
Absolutely. Shareholders' personal assets are generally protected from the corporation's debts and lawsuits. If the company goes under, you usually only lose your investment.
Your personal house, car, savings are safe. That's a huge draw for investment, reduces personal risk dramatically, essential for funding.
Massive advantage. But, critically, it's not always absolute, is it?
Good point. Courts can sometimes pierce the corporate veil.
Right. If there's fraud, or if owners treat the company like a personal piggy bank, or don't follow corporate rules, a court might hold shareholders personally liable after all.
So you still have to run it properly as a separate entity, but generally, liability is limited. Okay, next advantage.
Transfer of ownership.
Easy to sell your shares.
Relatively speaking, yes. Ownership is in stock certificates. Especially for public companies on stock exchanges, you can buy and sell shares readily.
Provides liquidity for investors, makes it easier to get in and out, helps attract capital.
Allows the ownership structure to change without necessarily disrupting the business itself.
But maybe less easy in private companies.
True. Closely held corporations often have restrictions on share transfers. And big shifts in ownership can mean shifts in control, which isn't always smooth.
Okay, another big one. Unlimited life, perpetual existence.
The corporation exists independently of its owners. Shareholders can come and go, directors can change, but the corporation itself can continue indefinitely.
Think of companies that have been around for over a century, right? Ford, Coca-Cola.
Exactly. That provides stability, enables very long-term strategic planning, makes it more attractive for certain types of investment.
But the potential downside.
Can they become too stable, bureaucratic, resistant to change, maybe even outlive their usefulness?
Yeah, inertia can set in. Interesting critique. What about raising money?
That's a huge advantage. Relative ease of securing capital in large amounts.
Through selling stock, issuing bonds.
Exactly. Access to public markets, venture capital, private equity. Much broader funding options than partnerships or sole proprietorships usually have.
Allows for massive growth, big projects, major R&D investment. Think IPOs raising millions or billions. Crucial for scaling.
But the trade-off.
Raising capital often means giving up ownership, right? Dilution for existing shareholders and more regulatory hassle.
Yes. More funding often comes with more scrutiny and less individual control.
Okay, and the last advantage listed. Increased ability and expertise.
Corporations can generally afford to attract top talent. Better salaries, benefits, career paths.
So they can hire experienced executives, specialized researchers, skilled professionals across the board.
Which leads to better management, more innovation, stronger competitive position, access to better human capital, enhances the overall mindset.
But the critique here is probably cost and maybe complexity.
Yes, Higher payroll costs, potentially more complex organizational structures, more layers of management.
Okay, so significant advantages, especially around liability, longevity, and funding. What about the disadvantages of incorporating?
First up, activity restrictions.
Meaning the corporation can only do what its charter says it can do.
Largely, yes. The stated purpose in the charter plus relevant laws define its scope. It might limit flexibility to jump into totally new, unrelated areas compared to, say, a sole proprietor.
Could hinder diversification or quick strategic pivots if you need to formally amend the charter.
Right, a potential constraint on strategy. Then there's a lack of representation issue.
Separation of ownership and control.
Exactly. Shareholders own the company, but management and the board run it day to day, especially in big public companies.
And their interests might not always align perfectly. Management might focus short-term, shareholders long-term.
That's the classic agency problem. Management might act in ways that benefit them rather than maximizing shareholder value. A potential mindset clash.
Okay. Regulation is another big one.
Oh, yeah. Corporations face much more government oversight. Securities laws, environmental regs, industry rules.
Think SEC reporting for public companies. It's extensive.
Adds significant administrative costs, requires compliance expertise, takes up management time. A definite burden.
And setting it up costs more initially too, right? Organizing expenses.
Yes. Lawyer fees for incorporation documents, state filing fees, maybe initial accounting setup costs.
Definitely higher startup costs than the simpler forms. Could be a barrier for bootstrapped ventures.
Absolutely. And finally, the big tax disadvantage for many, double taxation.
This applies mainly to traditional C corporations, right?
Correct. The corporation pays income tax on its profits.
Okay, tax layer 1.
Then, if it distributes those after-tax profits to shareholders as dividends.
The shareholders pay personal income tax on those dividends, tax layer 2.
Exactly. Double taxation can significantly reduce the net return to investors compared to pass-through entities, a major funding consideration.
Ouch. Okay, but just like partnerships, there are corporate forms designed to avoid some of these issues, like the S Corp.
Yes, the S Corporation. It's a regular corporation that makes a special tax election with the IRS.
To be taxed like a partnership.
Essentially, yes. It avoids corporate-level income tax. Profits and losses are passed through to shareholders' individual returns.
So you get the corporate benefit of limited liability, but avoid the double taxation problem.
That's the main appeal.
Yeah.
But there are strict rules to qualify.
Right. You mentioned those. Domestic company, eligible shareholders, under 100 shareholders, only one class of stock.
Yes, you have to fit within those guidelines.
And the other popular hybrid, the LLC, limited liability company.
Very popular now. It's designed to offer the best of both worlds, really.
Limited liability like a corporation.
Check.
And the tax flexibility of a partnership usually pass through taxation.
Check. Owners,
Oh.
called members,
Yeah.
get liability protection, but the LLC itself typically isn't taxed. Profits pass through. Great flexibility.
Sounds ideal. Any downsides?
Well, one potential issue is that LLC laws aren't uniform across all states. They can vary quite a bit.
So if you operate in multiple states, it could get complicated managing the different rules.
It could add complexity, yes. Something to consider for multi-state businesses.
Okay. And the sources briefly mention other corporate types, domestic, foreign.
Right. Domestic means incorporated in the state you're doing business. Foreign means incorporated in a different state.
Public versus private.
Public means shares are traded openly on an exchange. Private means shares are held, well, privately, not publicly available.
And nonprofit.
Formed for charitable, educational, religious purposes, etc. Generally tax-exempt if they meet the requirements. Different goals entirely.
Got it. And there are ongoing costs to being a corporation, too, beyond the setup.
Oh, yes. Recurring legal and accounting fees for compliance, annual state fees, employer taxes like unemployment and Social Security contributions.
It all adds up. Needs to be budgeted for.
Yeah, definitely. It's part of the cost of that corporate structure and its benefits.
Okay, last major structure on our list, franchising.
A bit different, this one. It's essentially a licensing agreement.
The franchisor grants the franchise the right to use their brand name, trademarks, operating system.
Exactly. To sell goods or services under that established system. Think fast food, hotels, fitness centers.
And the key dynamic is that the franchisee is legally independent,
Usually owns their own business entity, yes.
but economically very dependent on the franchisor's system and brand.
That's the core relationship. So, advantages for the franchisee. Training and guidance is a big one.
The franchisor teaches you how to run the business.
Often, yes. Comprehensive manuals, training programs, ongoing support. Reduces the learning curve, especially for first-time owners. Helps the mindset.
Like getting a business in a box almost, with instructions.
Kind of. Think of a new Subway franchisee getting trained on sandwich making, inventory, everything, via the official manuals.
But the critique, does it stifle your own ideas?
It can. You're generally required to follow the system precisely. Limits autonomy and a local adaptation.
Okay, next advantage. Brand name appeal.
Huge benefit. You open your doors, and people might already know and trust the brand.
Instant recognition. Less initial marketing needed, potentially faster customer acquisition, leverages the franchisor's established strategy.
Definitely. Opening McDonald's versus Joe's Burgers. Big difference in initial awareness.
But the flip side,
Your reputation is tied entirely to the franchisors. If they get bad press, it hits you, even if your location is great. A shared risk.
good point. Also, a proven track record.
Often, yes. The franchisor has likely worked out the kinks in the business model over time and across many locations.
So, potentially lower risk than starting something completely new from scratch? Evidence suggests lower failure rates sometimes?
Generally, that's the idea. You're buying into a system that's shown it can work. Reduces risk.
But critically, past success isn't a guarantee.
Not at all. Location, local competition, your own management skills,
Yeah?
they all still matter hugely.
Okay. And financial assistance.
Sometimes, franchisors might help you get loans through their banking relationships or occasionally offer direct financing.
Can make it easier to get the startup capital needed, helps with funding.
It can. But that help usually comes with strings attached. Strict requirements, maybe personal guarantees still
Okay.
needed.
Okay, disadvantages of franchising. Fees seem like a big one.
Oh yes, franchise fees. There's usually a hefty initial fee just to buy in,
Upfront cost.
then ongoing royalties, often a percentage of your gross sales, not profit.
Ouch. Percentage of the top line.
Plus, often required contributions to advertising funds. It adds up and eats into your margins, a major funding drain.
Reduces profitability significantly. Next, franchisor control.
We touched on this. The franchise agreement usually dictates a lot about how you run the business.
What you sell, pricing, store design, where you buy supplies.
Exactly. You might have to buy napkins from approved vendor X even if they're more expensive. Limits your flexibility, local innovation, strategic freedom.
Feels less entrepreneurial in some ways.
It can. You're executing their system, not creating your own as much.
And finally, unfulfilled promises.
The risk that the reality doesn't match the sales pitch. Maybe the profit projections were too optimistic or the support isn't as good as promised.
Lower traffic, higher costs than expected, leading to disappointment and financial loss, a major risk.
Absolutely highlights the need for serious due diligence. Talk to existing franchisees before signing anything.
Good advice. And the sources list other costs too, right? Besides the main fees.
Yeah, things like insurance, initial inventory, maybe remodeling to meet brand standards, utilities, payroll, loan payments, bookkeeping, legal fees, licenses.
It's a significant overall investment.
Definitely require substantial capital and careful financial planning.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground there, from the solo operator to the franchisee.
We have.
Oh,
And the main thread running through it all.
is that there's no single best structure. Right. It totally depends.
Exactly. You absolutely have to weigh the pros and cons of each against your specific situation, your goals, your resources, your risk tolerance, your long-term strategy.
And hopefully this deep dive has given you that foundational understanding, that critical perspective you need to start making those informed choices.
Moving beyond just definitions to really think strategically about the legal framework of your business.
So maybe a final thought to leave our listeners with, something to chew on.
How about this? In today's world, businesses often think about going global eventually.
Right, international expansion.
So how might that initial choice of legal structure made perhaps years earlier impact your ability to actually do that, to scale internationally, navigate different countries' regulations?
Oh, interesting. Does choosing, say, an LLC versus an S-corp early on make it easier or harder to set up shop in Europe or Asia later?
It's a complex question, but definitely something to consider regarding the long-term implications of these foundational decisions.
Yeah.
How does your structure travel?
Great point. Something to definitely ponder.